Gomanagíomh a chuirde go léir agus 100,000 fáilte, chuig códáil rigúnach an bhforum tochaí an talabhíochta ag an RDS in Mala á Chlia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the regional conference of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture here at the RDS in Dublin. My name is Rose O'Donovan, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brussels-based agricultural publication AgriFacts, the longest-serving editor and the only woman to hold that post, I might add. I'm also a farmer's daughter who grew up in West Cork overlooking the Atlantic Ocean and a regular co-host at the annual forum that takes place each year in Brussels. And it is my pleasure to moderate this conference here with you today on my own turf for a change, where we'll be discussing food systems transformation, financing the transition, sustainable livestock production, and the shape of the future common agricultural policy. I think you would agree that this debate is particularly timely, ladies and gentlemen, as sustainable agri-production, food security, and indeed food sovereignty are very high on the political agenda. This event also comes at a time when negotiations on the future design of the Common Agricultural Policy and the multi-annual financial framework are going up a gear, and it takes place about 6 weeks after the annual Forum for the Future of Agriculture in Brussels on April 14th. It also comes ahead of the Commission's highly anticipated EU livestock strategy and the updated protein plan due out on July 7th at the very beginning of the Irish presidency of the EU Council, something we're hearing a lot about these days, which will be taking over the reins on July the 1st from Nicosia. We have a wide and varied agenda, ladies and gentlemen, to get through before 5 p.m. this afternoon with an impressive lineup of high-level speakers and panelists. But before we get cracking with proceedings, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank the long and growing list of the forum's partners, which were visible on both screens just before we kicked off. And we'll be hearing from distinguished speakers from some of those organizations during the course of the day. Just to say that this event is being recorded, not streamed, and will be available on the Forum for Ag website in the coming days. You can, of course, follow this regional conference on X, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Forum for Ag. And if you do use social media, be sure to mention #ForumForAg. And I would now kindly invite you to mute your phones. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to get cracking with our first panel debate on driving agri-food system transformation in the EU, a key question of our time. So I would invite now our distinguished speakers to join me on the podium, Mark Titterington, Stuart Gee, and Martin Voss. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Mark?
Oh, sorry.
That was a fashionable entrance there that you made. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, if I may, to my three distinguished speakers, my three gentlemen here. First up, delighted to welcome Mark Titterington, who was in a taxi about 10 minutes ago, making his way across Dublin City. So great to see you in the flesh, Mark. Mark is certainly no stranger to anyone involved in the Forum for the Future of Ag, as he is one of the co-founders and currently serves as a member of the Forum's Advisory Council. It's fair to say that Mark wears a number of hats, as he is also a senior fellow at the Transatlantic Policy Network, and he joined Spirits Europe as Director General in September 2025. No doubt you've been busy, Mark, ever since taking over that role with the tariff questions, with the trade irritants coming from the other side of the pond, but perhaps that's a discussion for another day. And I understand that you're just back from a trade mission to Thailand with Commissioner Hansen.
Indeed.
So good to see you again. Next up, we have Stuart Gee, who works for EIT Climate Kick. And this is about bringing about innovations in the Irish agri-food system that will enable this country to meet its sustainability targets. A tough task there, Stuart. Climate Kick is Europe's leading climate innovation agency and community, mobilizing systems change in countries, regions, cities, and businesses. They orchestrate solutions and facilitate learning to bridge the gap between climate commitments and current realities on the ground. Good to meet you personally, Stuart. And last but by no means least, a very warm welcome to Martin Voss, who is Chief Innovation Officer at the Oath Group, which is actually the latest partner of this forum. So congratulations on that. A number of people actually saw the logo earlier on, and they were asking me about it, Martin. So this is our latest partner to the forum. And just by way of explanation, Oath is a public benefit company which seeks to regenerate life in depleted soils globally with naturally occurring beneficial microorganisms to address some of the agriculture's biggest challenges, including yield, nutrient density, and soil carbon. And we'll be hearing more about Oath in a moment in due time. But please give my panelists a very warm round of applause. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot to get through before 2:15. But before we get cracking with the overall discussion, we're just going to go through the running order. First of all, we're going to have a recorded video message from Irish Fine Gael MEP Nina Carberry. And following this, each of my panelists here will present a 5-minute impulse statement providing their perspective on the key question of agri-food systems transformation. And there is a countdown clock in front of you, and let it be known that I'm a tough taskmaster, Mark will tell you. This will be followed by a question and answer session between myself and the speakers, and from around 2:05, ladies and gentlemen, we will then open it up to the floor for questions from the audience. So have your questions up your sleeve, and we'll open it up then for a broader discussion. We have microphones available in the room. And then we hope to wrap up the session at 2:15 before moving on to our panel discussion on financing the transition. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a moment to listen to that video message from Nina Carberry, who is, of course, Ireland's Fine Gael MEP from Midlands Northwest since 2024. And Nina sits in the European People's Party, the EPP, which is the largest political group in the European Parliament. She serves on 3 key committees: Transport and Tourism, International Trade and Budget, and was very keen to join us here today in Dublin, but she is actually heavily involved in discussions on the long-term budget that is currently ongoing in Brussels. As many of you know, Nina is a former champion amateur national hunt jockey and who basically swapped trips to Cheltenham and winning in Cheltenham for trips to the European Parliament plenary session in Strasbourg. So I would now ask the technical team to roll that video message from Nina.
Good morning, everyone. Nina Carberry here, member of the European Parliament for the Midlands Northwest. Firstly, I want to warmly welcome everyone here today and to apologise that I couldn't be there with you in person. I'm delighted that this Forum for the Future of Agriculture regional event is being held in Dublin. It is particularly timely, not only as Ireland prepares to assume the presidency of the Council from the 1st of July, but also because agriculture sits at the very heart of Irish culture, history and our economy, and remains our largest indigenous sector and the cornerstone of rural life. The coming months will be pivotal as negotiations on the next Common Agricultural Policy gathers pace. At the centre of this discussion is the critical issue of the overall size of the next CAP budget. We have seen the Commission's proposal published last July, and it is clear that we need significantly stronger financial commitment to agriculture. We must retain a standalone CAP, and crucially, it cannot become a one-size-fits-all policy across Europe. The CAP has been central to the EU's success, ensuring food security, supporting farm incomes and sustaining rural communities. For Ireland, as a small but highly export-orientated country, it has also underpinned the resilience and competitiveness of our agri-food sector since we joined the EU over 50 years ago. In the next CAP, we must strike the right balance, maintaining a strong common framework across member states so that no country undercuts another, while also allowing enough flexibility for each member state to design schemes that reflect the realities of their own farming systems. At the same time, we must ensure that there is adequate and properly ring-fenced funding for eco-schemes and environmental measures within the CAP. These schemes are now a central pillar of the policy, supporting farmers to adopt more sustainable practices, from improving soil health and water quality to enhancing biodiversity and reducing emissions. Across Europe, and particularly in Ireland, farmers are making significant efforts to farm more sustainably. With the right supports, they can go further. In my role as an MEP and through my work on the Budget Committee, I am working to defend and protect and increase the next CAP budget. The Parliament's position is clear. We are pushing for a budget of 433 billion to reverse the Commission's proposal cuts. And we want to restore the rural development funding that has been left out. Now we need the Council and the Commission to listen. While CAP is central, it is not the only funding stream we must leverage. Alongside this, we should recognise the enormous potential of new technologies to support both productivity and sustainability in agriculture. The Commission's budget proposal includes opportunities through European Competitiveness Fund, which contains a dedicated heading for bioeconomy and agriculture, as well as through Horizon Europe for research and innovation. I've been advocating to ensure that these funds are accessible in practice to SMEs, agri-tech innovators and farmers themselves. We need to invest in our indigenous businesses, and the scale of these funding calls must not exclude smaller but highly impactful projects. Just last week, I travelled across the constituency, which covers 15 counties, meeting with farmers and hearing directly about the challenges they face. They are dealing with rising financial pressures, ongoing uncertainty, and the lingering impacts of energy shocks, including fuel and fertiliser costs, all while continuing to produce the food we depend on. Their role in our economy and society cannot be overstated. If recent global events has taught us anything, from the war in the Ukraine to the ongoing instability in the Middle East, it is that Europe has at times become complacent about food security. We cannot afford to make the same mistake again. This is why I feel strongly that a robust CAP must remain at the heart of this budget. My discussions with farmers also brought a strong focus on livestock farming, which is particularly relevant as the EU develops its upcoming livestock strategy. My hope is that this strategy strikes the right balance, one that is economically viable, environmentally responsible and grounded in a fair and functioning value chain. I hope that over the coming months we see real progress on these critical issues, particularly during Ireland's presidency. I will continue to push these priorities forward at a European level and look forward to continuing this conversation in the near future. Thank you.
Well, Nina certainly covered a lot of ground there, and I think picking up on a lot of points that are directly relevant to the farming sector, and we'll be sort of unpicking some of those during the course of the afternoon. So Nina Carberry, ladies and gentlemen there. Mark, yourself, welcome again.
Thank you.
Let's dive straight in, shall we? We'd like to hear from your perspective, your introductory remarks, and also drawing perhaps on the outcome of the annual forum that just took place there in Brussels, the annual forum for the future of agriculture that took place on April 14th. Were there lessons that could be drawn out of that, Mark? Certainly a broad discussion. During the course of the day, I had the pleasure of sharing the stage with yourself and Stephen Sacker. So we look forward to hearing from yourself. Take it away, Mark.
Great. Well, thank you, Rose. Great to be here. Great to be in Dublin. And as you say, very timely. Just ahead of the Irish presidency, we often try and time these regional conferences, as you know, just ahead of the country that's taken the presidency. And I think we've got an interesting 6 months in front of us. You know, and you've heard me say this before. You find me at a time of unbelievable optimism about the future for the agriculture, the agri-food sector, and at the same time, unbelievable pessimism. And those are probably the two things that I walked away from our annual conference with. Let me jump into that a little bit. The optimism is, I don't think there's ever been as much money somewhere around agriculture and agri-food system as there is today. That's public money. We're starting to think more creatively about how we could use that. There's more private money that goes beyond just the core produce that companies, corporations around the world are willing to pay. They're willing to pay for improvements in soil health, resilient supply chains, carbon sequestration, biodiversity enhancements. This, and for many of us in the forum, and I think certainly Thierry and Jürgen would endorse this, I'm sure. I mean, when we started, we talked about how do we get farmers and land managers, land stewards paid for the public goods that they provide beyond the crop, and now we kind of have it almost in the cusp of our hands. Why am I pessimistic? I'm pessimistic because we haven't yet figured out how to unlock that, and we haven't quite worked out yet where the limits of public policy action are and where we need the private sector to be given the space in order to be able to do what it needs to do. give you a couple of examples on that. I think it's terrific what we've done with the regulatory framework for carbon farming. When we started that work 5 or 6 years ago in the European Commission, DG Klima really set the pace. I think we're in danger of over-regulating that and try to over-orchestrate it from a public policy point of view. We're going to crowd out the private sector actors that want to invest. Another example would be we talk this for many occasions on the potential for regenerative agriculture. One of the key barriers to regenerative agriculture, as we know, is adoption of the cover crops. Farmers have got to pay for the seed, they've got to manage it, that's all cost. We have a fantastic opportunity to align intermediate or cover crops bred for that purpose to go into sustainable aviation fuel, unlocking yet another source of private revenue, durable, predictable private revenue. We're in danger of drawing the cursor and putting the line in the wrong place of that regulation. We need technologies in order to be able to unlock that. Martin, I'm sure you'll talk about this from the oath perspective. We've talked about wanting to give farmers tools, different tools, biological tools, to bring into the marketplace, and yet we still create the barriers to entry for regulatory hurdles because we haven't figured out yet how to regulate them. Okay. And then I come back to the CAP. As Nina says, one of the biggest achievements of the European Union, absolutely fabulous, created in a different time. And I'm not really talking about this reform round, but we have got to look to the future and work out what is the core objective of this policy. What do we want to spend 400, 500, 600 billion euros on over a lifetime? And how do we use it to send the market to the signals, not just to farmers that that's what we want, but to the private market as well that can then co-invest? It wasn't built to do that, but in my view, it needs to transition into that. So filled with glorious optimism and at times downright pessimism. But the sun is shining today, and I'm in Dublin, so that makes me more optimistic than pessimistic.
Good to hear, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Realism, perhaps, rather than pessimism. I might ask the tech crew to put the countdown clock. It's not actually working, so I'll leave that to the experts down the back. Stuart, you've heard now from Nina Carberry, our MEP over in Brussels. You've heard from Mark, I suppose, bringing the forum's perspective. You're very much on the ground. Before this started off, you told me that you were engaging with Carberry down in West Cork, my own neck of the woods. So we look forward to hearing from your own point of view. So you take it away, Stuart, when you're ready.
Yeah. Look, I wouldn't call it pessimism from my side. It's more frustration with the pace of things. Change is happening, but it's not happening nearly fast enough. And that 400 or 500 billion, the question should be, how do we leverage another multiples of that? How do we use that to make more, to get more, and particularly into the hands of farmers? Because you'll hear all across Europe, farmers are up against it. It's a low margin business. I was just chatting to a German colleague down there before we started. And they're global commodities, and it's really hard to have a predictable source of income. But maybe I should start by explaining who Climate Kick are and what we do in Ireland, because everybody I've spoken to since I came into the foyer earlier on is going, who are you? What do you do? And I've got this quite a lot over the last number of years here in Ireland. So I'm Stuart G, and I lead Climate Kick's work in Ireland. We work in lots of different areas. Agri-food is just one, and that's what we do in Ireland. We have a partnership with the Department of Agriculture that's currently in its third phase, so we've been successful enough in our first 2-year engagement to get another 4 years. And we were brought in as part of Food Vision, which is Ireland's 10-year agri-food strategy. One of the 200 actions in that was a partnership with Climate Kick. We were asked, could we support Irish stakeholders in closing the gap between current reality, and back then it was climate ambition, but I think I would change that now to our sustainability ambitions. And could we use our systems innovation approaches to do that? 4 years later, how successful have we been? I don't know, but I would say we are beginning to shift the dial. I suppose just to explain then a little bit about how we've gone about that. So we have a consultative group of 25 organisations, so 5 government departments, all of the big state agencies in agri-food, so Teagasc, Bord Bia, EPA, all of them, banks, farming organisations, academia, they all sit around the table, and they helped us design a portfolio of large-scale, what were supposed to be large-scale interconnected interventions. There was 7 of them. So the first one was a 2050 vision. So you can't go anywhere unless you know where you're going. I think the forum would be well on board with that one. The second one was around diversifying our whole agri-food sector, so new products from existing crops or whole new value chains. Third one was around place-based circular bioeconomy, so how do we use the raw materials that we're generating to make that more circular. The fourth one, carbon farming or payments for ecosystem services. Fifth one was sustainable beef. Climate neutral beef, I think was what we called it originally, but don't hold me to that. The sixth one was sustainable dairy, and the last one was around growing and diversifying the tillage sector. Now, because we're a small team, we focused on four. And I work directly, I sit on the National Carbon Farming Working Group, so we've been tracking the CRCF progress. And from an Irish perspective, just because I know there's lots of non-Irish people in the room, 38% of Ireland's national emissions come from agriculture. Nearly 4 times the European average. So we have a big challenge on our hands. And if agriculture doesn't pick up that challenge, it only starts to look worse and worse every year. 75% of that is methane, roughly. Almost 25% is fertilizer. 2 things we can tackle and can be reduced pretty quickly if we put the effort and resources into it. But also then you were talking about, you've got biodiversity, water quality, all these issues, and our national ambition is to have all of those things as assets that can be paid for, or outcomes that can be paid for, I suppose, a better way of putting it, which goes a lot further than the CRCF, where they are co-benefits. So we want to set up a system, and we think in Ireland we have the possibilities and the data infrastructure to set up that system to deliver it. So we do an awful lot of stuff in Ireland. How much we do on the ground, in the last couple of years we've really started to drive that forward. We've identified manure additives to reduce methane from slurry, and we've got them rolled out on some farms down in West Cork with Carberry, a co-op down there, and we're looking to scale that out to 40 to 50 farms this year through learnings that we've had. And everybody says, why don't you go faster? Why don't you go faster? And it's not that easy. I don't want to take up too much time, so you cut me off if I need to. So as part of that work, we identified what we were classing as ready now technologies. There aren't very many. And if you take those ready now ones that are acceptable to farmers and cooperatives or processors, there's even less. So you've got a very limited pool of technologies to actually roll out that are ready to be rolled out at scale on farms, and they cost money. So how do you do that? So we've been working with the EPA on getting some of these products reflected in the national inventory, or when they're used, get reflected in the national inventory. We've also been working with Origin Green, which many of you will be familiar with. So we have a kind of a national system for carbon accounting on farm. So how do you get the products included in that? It reduces your MRV costs. So you just ask a couple of extra questions as part of that process. It's already paid for. And then how do we include it in a Teagasc, Ireland's main kind of ag advisory service. They have a tool called AgNav, which a farmer can use to get their baseline data, and then they can pick things that they might want to do as a transition plan. So how do you include them in that as well? So it's not as simple as saying, here's a product, it works, go use it. There's a whole plethora of parts of the system that need to be lined up to make sure that can happen. And those wheels move infuriatingly slowly.
That's your frustration, Stuart. That's your frustration.
Yeah. It's not that the solutions aren't there and that the money, I do believe the money is there, but we need to create trust and pathways for people to be able to drive it forward. And it just takes time.
Yep. Thank you very much for that. And as you say, farmers are up against it. That's how you started off. So we'll pick up some of those details in a moment. Stuart, thank you very much indeed. Martin, we look forward to hearing the Oath Group perspective, and maybe you might go into a little bit of detail of the work that you're doing in terms of soil regeneration, etc., at your organisation. So keep an eye on the time, and hopefully the revers out the front door will keep it down. So Martin, take it right away.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm an agronomist and plant pathologist by education, and so the way that I approach this food systems transformation thought process is from the farm, from the agronomy. And if we look back 30 years, we were worrying if we were able to produce enough to feed everyone that is going to be living and born on this planet. I think today that has shifted to the question, can we produce enough sustainably? And it's not that geopolitics are helping, right? All of the fertilizer plants that have been destroyed here recently in the Middle East will take 4 to 5 years to rebuild. While that is ongoing, something that's been ongoing much longer is soil degradation. We have heat waves, more drought, more frequently. And according to the WHO, 75% of all managed land is degraded. So those are not great starting points, but that's where we are. So what are some of the symptoms of this? Is that we've been using methods in agronomy, plant protection, and so forth that have contributed to this soil degradation, to the problem that we're in. And so I think it's very important that we all recognize that everything that we do in agriculture is based on the soil. And if we can't improve soil health, I don't know how we're going to solve the problem. So if you want to improve soil health, then there are a number of things that everybody knows that you can do, and those are the 5 regenerative agricultural practices that everybody knows by heart. And what I want to submit to you is that doing all of this without looking at the soil microbiome is missing the mark. That is the only way that we're going to step change soil health, water retention, nutrient availability in soils over time. And that also offers opportunity in supply chains that are integrated downstream to create additional income for growers through insets, potentially to offsets. So what we are trying to contribute to this is that we have developed microbial consortia. Those are products that contain any number of bacteria and fungi that are important for the functioning of soil, for soil health, that have been degraded over time, that have been eradicated in some severe situations. And you may ask, but Martin, so you can't just grab some microbes and chuck them around everywhere and hope that that's going to be fine, right? True. So what we have done is spent a number of years on understanding exactly how these work, how they interact, because that's the important thing. Everybody knows that in a teaspoon of soil you have 4,000 species and billions of cells of microbes, right? You have to understand these interactions to be able to influence them in a way that they do what is required in this situation. We've got a lot of people with very big brains working on this. We've been trialing in fields now for a couple of years. And just to give you an inkling of what that looks like is we have run trials in staple crops in Rwanda together with the Rwandan government that have unfertilized and fully fertilized treatments. In these unfertilized treatments, we're doubling yields at least, and we're adding yield on fully fertilized treatments. Now, beyond just this, this additional yield, what this does for the livelihood of land managers, of subsistence farmers in Rwanda is that it transforms the economy, the income of that farm. Now, the question is, of course, in extreme situations like that, okay, but how does that look like, for example, here in Europe, in the European Union? We started the trial now for 2 years in the southern EU for starters. I'm going to visit a couple of trials here in the Cork region tomorrow, see what that turns out as being. But in the Mediterranean area, drought stress is your first problem, of course, and when we reduce drought water supply by 30%, we can recuperate that. And for most of those growers that typically grow vegetables, leafy greens, and things like that, what we can also do is improve the synchronicity of finishing. That enables people to harvest on the same day. and then avoid penalties for not fulfilling contracts and so forth. So those are some little details. The bigger point is soil health is the basis for everything that we do. That is something that we have to improve by all means possible. And microbes, microbial consortia in particular, can make a contribution, and that is what we want to bring to the solution.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very clear indeed, a clear message there. I'm going to just come around now and sort of like, I suppose, unpick some of the points that have been raised by the three speakers. Mark, it was something actually perhaps you alluded to, and certainly Stuart picked it up. You spoke about the Common Agricultural Budget, huge, I suppose, significant amount of money, as you know. But the idea of leveraging many more times that amount. You know, here at the forum, we speak a lot about, I suppose, investment from the private sector. Do you have some examples that you can share, perhaps, of where that's worked in practice?
No, I mean, so there's a couple of things I think in there, and Martin touched on it. Some people in this audience are aware that we did quite a bit of work on financing the transition, a year-long inquiry that looked at what the role of public and private finance would be. And one of the outtakes of that was if you were to say actually that soil health is the starting point, because I don't know about you, I've never met a farmer yet that doesn't care about the health of the soil. It's one thing they take care of. Biodiversity is somewhere at a landscape level, arguably even water is. Soil is what people care about. Now, if we can align on that, and you use all that power of the money in the CAP to link to improving the health of your soil, that's a hell of a signal that you're sending into the market then to insurers, to financiers, to banks, to corporations, that this is what we're going to put our money into. Now come and match that. And we looked at different ways that that could be done. There was a conditionality of the payment, but also then it could be a PepsiCo or a Nestle that want to invest in the health of the soils and the farms that they're taking produce off. They can pay a sustainability premium. You could see that even complemented by a tax break. If you're able to go to a bank with your data that says I improve my soil by health by X or Y, then I'm theoretically and in practice, an outcome-based approach, I'm demonstrating that I've got a more resilient and productive farm, which, by the way, the things that you're doing on that is probably lowering your operating costs as well. So there are a number of different ways that we can monetize all of this, but it requires us to say that that's what we're going to go after, and I'm not sure we've quite landed that yet.
No. And that's strategic thinking approach, I suppose,
that's
right?
That's strategic thinking. And then if you're going to do that, you've also got to give the farmers the tools that they need, whether it's a biological or a chemical tool. You've got to be able to give farmers the freedom to manage their land in the way that they know how. They're the best stewards of the land. We haven't quite figured that out for existing technology or even for new technology yet. Yeah. So parts of the system, I think, are still working against it. You described it, Stuart, as frustration. Yeah, I think I would have that word as well. We have many of the tools now in our hands. We've got to calibrate them.
Good point there. Perhaps we'll do a bilateral on your commissioner with Hansen. Perhaps that's more appropriate. Stuart, you spoke very eloquently, and you have great experience on the ground. A farm, as you said, that it's a low margin occupation, right? How do you convince, a moment ago you were saying when we spoke earlier, last year milk prices were high, flying high. It's a different situation this year. High costs, Nina Carberry spoke about fertiliser cost, input cost. How do you sort of stimulate that buy-in from farmers on the ground? You said you deal a lot with Carberry and West Cork. How do you maintain that buy-in from farmers, Stuart?
Yeah, look, I suppose the first thing to say is that Carberry do a lot of the engagement with the farmers, not us directly. We do talk to them, obviously, but they're the ones who mobilise in the first place. There is no problem mobilising farmers.
Okay, good.
There are loads of farmers out there who want to improve on their figures. I don't think that's an issue. The problem is the cost of it and the risk involved in doing it. And I think that's where we need to use public funding to de-risk that early stage transition stuff. I think loads of farmers are already way ahead. You find hundreds and hundreds. I hear them on the podcast all the time. Different farmers who are doing great stuff. I think one thing I just want to, I don't think you meant it, but you said focus on soil. I don't think we should focus on one thing. I think it should be soil, water, biodiversity, carbon. Those
Soil
are
being fundamental, I suppose, to all of those, right?
and one solution can impact all four of those things. Okay, so I think if you go to a farmer and say, okay, here's a suite of things you can do, which one do you want to do? One farmer might want to put in a pond. One farmer might want to use oaf or whatever. Give them options. I think where I would see the real need for investment is data as a public good.
Right. So access to data, who has it?
It's
who
not
wants
just
it?
access,
Yeah.
it's setting up the data infrastructure that we're going to need for the next 25,
Right.
30 years.
That comes up again and again, even at the forum as well, Mark, right? You know, that idea of big data and how can people tap into it for greater policy formulation, right? And more accurate policy
Well, it's-
formulation. Is it adequate in Ireland, Stuart?
It's not just big data, it's farm level data.
Okay.
So if you want additionality, and this is the key principle in all of these outcomes, you have to know what you have to start with, who's paying for something else. So there could be public schemes, so CAP or whatever could be paying for some of it. But what else can I do? And where else can I get money? So you have to be able to stack private investment on top of public investment in these things. So we need a really robust data infrastructure. And one of the big pain points for farmers is bureaucracy. So how do we get rid of as much of that as possible while building trust that the data is robust and transparent? We have the tools for that.
Sure.
But, you know, if you go, I was at the National Planning Championship last year, the year before, went into the Department of Agriculture tent, scheme for this, scheme for this, scheme for this, scheme for this. My head was melted just when I walked in the door. Like
A lack
how-
of joined up, sort of a lack of a joined up approach,
yeah,
perhaps?
so essentially, what do we need to measure? 4 or 5 things. Emissions, removals, soil health, and there's a bunch of indicators for that, obviously. Biodiversity, quality and quantity, and water, just hard enough at a farm level. Maybe it's actions based on a farm level, but on a catchment basis,
Okay.
then we've got quality.
Thank-
Like,
yeah.
we measure all those things all the time. Soil carbon is the only one that's probably still a bit expensive to do to any degree of accuracy, but we can do all the other stuff. So why don't we go and do it?
Martin, you're nodding your head there in agreement, perhaps, to a limited approach of the indicator list. Perhaps we'll pick up on some of the points raised both from Mark and Stuart, and looking at the Oath Group in terms of that public-private partnership, blended financing. So if you'd like to pick up some of the points raised by your counterparts on the stage, and then maybe bringing it back to what you do with your organisation.
Yeah. Good question. So, as a public benefit company, clearly we're trying to first look at the mission and bring that to the farm. We're relatively early. We're still a heavy R&D, little commercial, or nascent commercial. And but the way that you start up a company out of nothing with this mission is sort of scratching its head a little bit in the same area here. And the path that we have chosen is to find organizations or individuals that want to make an impact, that want to do something about food security and soil health, and that will not come around every quarter and ask for dividends, right? So that is how we have addressed that.
On that note, I have to ask, as a U2 fan, because when I was researching you and your organisation, The Edge made it into RTE News. This was picked up by national newspapers. I may ask, might I, because he is one of the individuals that you mentioned who believes in this whole area, right, Martin, in
That's
terms
right.
of generating food security.
Yeah.
So you might tell us that story, anecdote very briefly, and perhaps just that idea of, you know, that buy-in again, not only just from the public-private, but from certain individuals
Right.
who want to invest
Yes.
and that aren't looking for, that, you know, as you say, dividends every quarter. I mean, that's quite an interesting story, Martin, right?
Yeah. So, two of our co-founders are Bono and The Edge from the rock band U2.
Okay, and who hasn't heard of U2, ladies and gentlemen, right?
There you go. Listen to their music, please. And of course, both of them have been involved in projects and investments in the area of sustainability, social justice, and so forth. And they, of course, have a large range of things they could be investing in, but they recognize that it all starts with the soil, right? If we don't solve this, that is going to be a really big problem. And there's so few solutions that are novel and go beyond what has been tried before. And cracking the code for introducing microbial consortia back into degraded soils is something that we weren't able to do previously, not able to do responsibly. And that is what interested them in this mission. And Bono, of course, has been very involved in Rwanda for a couple of decades. And that is one of the reasons why that is also one of our starting points with our involvement there, field trialing, registrations. We have an organization there now that is starting to deploy the technology in Rwanda.
Okay, well done to you as well for being open to that. And I suppose there's a cachet there now, as you said, that kind of star quality. So ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from our three panelists. Who would like to ask a question? Perhaps something that we haven't covered already, or that has been sort of, that you'd like to get a response to. Anyone? Perhaps. Matt Dempsey, former editor of the Irish Farmers Journal. Thank you, Matt.
Well,
Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rose.
There's pictures of Matt, as I said earlier on. There's pictures of Matt all along this corridor. He's quite ahead here at the RDS. So please, Matt, take it away. Yeah?
Thank you. No, I farm about 20 miles from here, and a mixture of livestock and arable or tillage. And the Department of Agriculture always measured the organic matter of the soil that was in continuous tillage. And under Irish conditions, it has stayed static at roughly 6% for the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. Very sensibly, the department gave up measuring organic matter on the basis that there was no movement from continuous tillage, but with a good rotation. What puzzles me is that we're spoken about soil health. I haven't met anyone that will give me any kind of breakdown as to the health of my soil except the organic matter. The biome itself is a wonderful concept. I'm not quite sure what it can deliver, nor am I sure how it can be used and capitalized to reduce fertilizer inputs. We have in this country a really well-funded agricultural development authority encompassing education, research and advice. And one of the aspects I think that may be missing in today's discussions is the authentication that that body can give to recommendations going out to farmers, rather than relying, with all due respects, on various commercial or other bodies. And I think that's an indication of the level of trust that farmers have in the agency that exists and is publicly funded. So I think if we're to go further down this road of the abstract matter of soil health, that you should try and get your own efforts authenticated by the national body that's there if you want to get large take-up by farmers. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Who'd like to respond to that?
I
Martin,
certainly
you're very best
like
placed.
to. Yes, no problem. So I do agree that these independent verifications are absolutely necessary, and we're engaging in those. We're just starting in Ireland. We will have a more substantial program going on starting this autumn, and that will include organizations like the one you mentioned. Now, as far as the soil organic matter on your farm, in this part of the world, we have the blessing that summers are cold, winters are mild, and it rains a lot, all of which is conducive to maintaining soil organic matter levels. If we look at the Lucas average across the EU, we're just about at 4%. If you go further south, where it gets warmer, we have soil organic matters in the 1.5% range, right? So the problem is different everywhere, and approaches like ours, of course, can add more value the more degraded a situation might be. That, I think that's obvious. What we have found not in this part of the world yet, but in others, is that still the plant nutrients in soils are sometimes not as plant available as they ought to be. Phosphorus is a very well-known example. And the mechanisms of action that these microbes have to make plant nutrients more plant available are also well understood, right? So local pH management and some others, siderophores, and these things will help plants also in this environment to access these nutrients. The question back is, how much are we fertilizing, and is that level appropriate? Or can we, with the help of microbes, reduce these fertilization levels sensibly, avoid them washing out into nitrate into groundwater, or in the case of phosphorus, which is a globally finite resource, to be washed into rivers and then on ocean beds where they can't do anything for us anymore.
Thank you for that, Martin. Are there other questions from the floor? Okay, perhaps not. We have plenty of other opportunities in any case, but I might start wrapping up this session because we're on a tight schedule during the course of the afternoon. I suppose now, just very briefly, each one of you, perhaps you might give me, in a very brief synopsis, what is the key ingredient in driving that agri-food system transformation in the EU? Mark, I'll start with yourself.
Well, not surprisingly for me, it's finance. We've got to get more money in farmers' pockets. It's a really tough business. I know from our own, my wife's family's farm, dairy farmers, very tough business. We've got to put more money in their pockets. There isn't one solution to do that. You know, some of you know I worked for an ag tech company in the US for the last 6 or 7 years for carbon sequestration. They've been putting $1 million in a couple of farmers' pockets who've been in the program for 4 years in terms of carbon farming. It's great for them. That's carbon farming. There are other solutions, scope 3 reductions for other farmers. There are farmers that are around data centers that can invest in regen ag and get paid by Google for the data centers. There's no one size fits all, and it doesn't all come from public subsidy, and it doesn't all come from private finance. We've got to join all these little dots in the system up in order to make it easier for farmers to do what they do and to get paid for doing it.
And leveraging, as you say, as said earlier, yourself, Stuart, the key ingredient in driving that agri-food system transformation.
Yeah, I think that there's two things. The first one I would say is one of the barriers to getting the finance flowing is co-claiming. And I don't want to get into technicalities, but essentially, you've got your liter of milk, it goes into multiple different products, but maybe only one of those companies buying one of those products is actually putting money down the chain. How do we get them all to put a small amount in to aggregate so that the farmer gets a decent, enough to make the changes? So that's one. The other one I think is, and it hasn't been brought up today, it's culture. I think, you know, we need to put culture back in agriculture. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but we did a lot of work on this with Professor PJ Matthews from the Creative Futures Academy in UCD. We were looking at the future vision stuff. We did our future visioning. Everybody agreed on what a farmer should look like in 2050. We did Pictionary, farmer sitting there on a holiday, able to go for a pint down the pub, family, local vibrant community, maybe a windmill, you know, some kind of bioenergy, biodiversity, crops, livestock. Everybody agreed what it looks like. So there's a big cultural piece. If that's what we want, how do we get the change? And we're talking about the science, we're talking about the technology, but where's the culture? You've got the MAC in Ireland. You've got all these brilliant things that can reduce emissions and improve profitability. Most farmers don't do them. So why? We haven't got the culture piece.
Changing that narrative as well, Stuart.
That narrative piece is really important. So I think that's really, really important. And then an extension of that is, you know, you heard me start talking about our institutions being a bit of a frustration. I think for me, we always talk about what will farms look like in 2050. We don't say, what does Teagasc, the EPA, Board Bia, the Department of Agriculture look like in 2050? We never ask those questions. That's a missing piece, because they're all doing brilliant stuff. But if you ask anybody who's working in those organizations, what will we look like if we're successful in delivering this by 2050? And I think that's a missing part. That's slowing down progress, I think. There's a bit of longer term thinking needed
Okay,
for the
thank you
institute.
for that. You're very clear. Martin, yourself?
Yeah. So I agree with all of those points, and I want to point the finger towards the administrative burden that growers as well as companies like ours are faced with in the European Union. Over the last decades, this part of the world has turned into the most difficult and most expensive place to get anything registered, whether it's chemical or biological. It does not make much of a difference, and it's putting Europe on the back foot. We're able to launch innovation in other places where regulatory processes are rigorous, not less rigorous than here, but more efficient and faster. And I think it would be a great advantage for the growers in the EU and the food system here if innovation could come quicker into the market and onto the farms.
Okay, very clear indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to my speakers, Mark Titterington, Stuart G, and Martin Voss, and of course, Nina Carberry, who joined us online. Please give a warm round of applause to my speakers, and I invite you all to go back to your seats, okay?